Hamburg sits 116 kilometers from the sea. New York lifted a bridge 64 feet rather than move its port. London simply closed. Look at a map of the world's great ports, and something is wrong. Hamburg sits 116 kilometers from the open sea. Antwerp is up a river. So is London, and Philadelphia, and Montreal. These are not the accidents of a few odd cities. The pattern is everywhere, and it points at something uncomfortable. Almost no major port is in the place a modern ship would choose. Every one of them was put there deliberately. Because a port is not a place on the water. It is a seam. It is the exact point where moving cargo by water stops being possible, and moving it by land has to begin. Sailors have a name for that point. They call it the head of navigation. The furthest a vessel can get upriver before something stops it. A sandbar, a bend, a waterfall. That line is where ports are born. And the incentive was always to push that line as far inland as it would go. For most of history, moving goods over land was ruinously expensive compared to floating them. A cart could bankrupt a cargo that a barge carried for pennies. So every extra mile a ship traveled upriver was a mile a wagon did not. The best port was not the safest harbor. It was the deepest possible stab into the continent. You can see that rule drawn across the map of the United States. Along the East Coast runs a geological step called the fall line, where rivers drop off the Piedmont in rapids. Colonial ships sailed upstream until they hit it and could go no further. Look at what sits on that line today. Richmond, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Trenton, Washington, Augusta. A row of cities marking the place where the boats had to stop. But read that rule again carefully, because it contains a hidden assumption. The head of navigation is not a property of the river. It is a property of the ship. It encodes how deep this particular hull sits, how long it is, how it gets loaded and unloaded. Change the ship and the line moves. Nobody in 1680 worried about that, because for 200 years the ship barely changed. Then it changed twice in a single lifetime. First, the draft. A colonial trader needed a few meters of water. A modern container ship needs 15 or 16, fully loaded. Second, and more brutally, the cargo changed shape. Break bulk meant sacks and crates and barrels, handled by hand in warehouses by gangs of men. It wanted a dense city waterfront. That is exactly what every old port already had. The container wanted the opposite. It wanted acreage. Flat, empty land to stack steel boxes, gantry cranes on rails, a railhead, and roads leading out. In 1956, a converted tanker left Newark, carrying 58 containers. 6 years later, the Port Authority opened a terminal at Elizabeth, New Jersey, the first place on Earth built from scratch for boxes. Manhattan's piers had nowhere to put them. So here is what should have happened next. Every port that was too far inland, too shallow, too cramped, should have picked itself up and walked downstream to deep water. That is what the economics say. It is what the engineering says. It is what the naval architects were shouting by the 1960s. And a few ports did exactly that. But most did not. And the reason they did not is the whole point of this video. Because the harbor is the cheap part. A quay is concrete. A crane can be bought. What cannot be bought is everything behind the quay. The rail yards that took a century to lay, the motorway junctions, the warehouse belt, the customs houses, the freight forwarders, the brokers, the insurers, the labor that lives within driving distance. That is the load-bearing structure, and none of it is on the water. Which is why Hamburg does not move. Ships bound for it sail 116 kilometers up the Elbe to reach a berth that could have been sitting on the coast. And the channel does not stay deep on its own. The river fills it back in, so it is dredged around the clock to hold a permitted depth of 16.1 meters at a cost of roughly 90 million euros a year. Notice what kind of number that is. It is not a construction cost. It is a subscription. In dry years, between 3 and 6 million tons of sediment have to be lifted out of the river and carried away. And the following year, the water brings more. Hamburg is not paying to build anything. It is paying annually and permanently to stop a decision made by medieval merchants from expiring. New York took the other route. It moved 8 kilometers across the harbor from Manhattan to Newark and Elizabeth. And it still was not enough. The channel serving those terminals runs under the Bayonne Bridge, opened in 1931 with a clearance of 151 feet. The new ships did not fit underneath, and the port by then could not move again. Everything it actually depended on was already sitting behind it, in New Jersey. So they lifted the bridge, not replaced it, lifted it. They built a new roadway inside the existing steel arch and raised it 64 feet to 215 for $1.7 billion. Then they deepened the channel underneath it for $3.4 billion more. Roughly 12% of every container entering the United States passes under that arch. The arch itself is original. It now carries a road built more than 80 years after it was finished. London shows the other ending. Containers needed more than 10 meters of water alongside. The Thames docks offered 7 to 9, and they silted. There was no room to stack, and no way to dredge a Victorian dock basin into a container terminal. So the Port of London did not adapt. It closed. East India, St. Catherine, Surrey, London docks shut between 1967 and 1970. And Britain's cargo went to a seaside resort with a pier. Felixstowe opened the country's first purpose-built container terminal in 1967. The same year London's first docks went dark. By 1980, it was the largest container port in Britain. Today, it handles around 4 million containers a year and more than 40% of everything the country ships in a box. Nothing about the water there was special. What was special was that the land behind it was empty. Rotterdam found a third answer: build new coast. Maasvlakte 2 pushed 2,000 hectares into the North Sea for 2.9 billion euros. A new location without ever leaving the old one. Because those are the choices. Every port is a fossil of a shipping technology that no longer exists. Ask why one sits where it does, and the honest answer is that once, a very long time ago, that was as far as a boat could go. If you want more of these, the choke points, the systems, the things quietly holding everything up, subscribe. New video every week. And if this was worth your time, hit like. It genuinely helps.